There are moments in Hollywood that arrive without warning, not with explosions, not with applause, but with silence. The kind of silence that tells you something irreversible has just happened. In 1983, in a softly lit room on a film set, Jamie Lee Curtis stepped into one of those moments. There was no spectacle built around it, no dramatic music, no attempt to announce history. Just a woman crossing a room, a shirt falling open, and a camera that did not look away. For a few seconds, the entire machinery of a movie production seemed to forget how to breathe. Crew members stood still. The air itself felt suspended. It wasn't shock that froze them, it was certainty, the sense that something had shifted, even if no one could yet explain what. For the audience, it would later become one of the most talked about scenes of the decade. For the press, it would become a headline machine. For Hollywood, it would become a problem. But for Jamie Lee Curtis, it was something else entirely. It was not about being seen, it was about deciding how. Because in that quiet moment, under that unblinking lens, she wasn't just playing a role, she was making a choice that would follow her for the rest of her life. And like all choices that truly matter, it came with a price no one could fully calculate at the time. When the film reached theaters, the silence did not last. It never does. The reaction came in waves, fast and loud and impossible to contain. Newspapers stopped talking about the story and started talking about the moment. Magazines pulled still frames and turned them into cover bait. Late-night hosts turned it into a punchline. In a matter of days, a single scene had swallowed an entire performance. Hollywood had seen boldness before, but this was different. This wasn't wrapped in glamour or hidden behind metaphor. It was simple, direct, and that made people uncomfortable. Some called it brave, many called it reckless, others didn't bother with labels at all and went straight for judgment. Letters began arriving at the studio, written in careful handwriting, full of worry and anger and moral certainty. Parents spoke about influence, commentators spoke about decline. Somewhere along the way, the conversation stopped being about a character in a film and became a trial of a woman in public. Jamie Lee Curtis watched it happen in real time. The headlines, the whispers, the sudden feeling that a single choice had been interpreted in 1,000 different ways, most of them not her own. And yet, beneath all the noise, one truth remained strangely untouched. No one had asked why she did it. They only asked what it meant for them. To understand why that moment mattered, you have to look at what people missed. They saw exposure. They assumed provocation. They reduced a deliberate decision to a talking point. But inside the work itself, the intention was quieter and far more precise. The scene was not designed to take something away. It was designed to show who held the power in the room. Jamie understood exactly how thin the line was. In that era of Hollywood, one step in the wrong direction could lock an actress into a single story forever. A label, a box, a reputation that followed her into every audition and every headline. And yet, she stepped anyway. Not because she wanted to shock, but because she refused to let fear do the directing. In interviews years later, she would return to the same idea again and again. The body was not the point. The point was authorship. Who decides how a woman is seen? Who controls the meaning of an image once it leaves the screen? For Jamie Lee Curtis, that question was never theoretical. Every role after that carried its shadow. Every camera angle came with memory. But instead of retreating, she began to choose more carefully, more deliberately, turning each appearance into something closer to a statement than a performance. What looked like risk from the outside was, from the inside, a form of discipline. And discipline, she knew, was the only way to survive a system that never forgot. Long before cameras waited for her to make a choice, Jamie Lee Curtis had grown up watching what attention could do to a life. Her parents were not just actors, they were symbols, faces that belonged as much to the public as they did to themselves. From the outside, it looked like a storybook version of Hollywood. Inside, it was something far more fragile. She learned early that fame was not a spotlight, it was a furnace. Arguments became rumors, rumors became headlines, private moments became public property, and a child, standing somewhere in the middle of all that noise, learned a quiet lesson that never left her. In this world, your story will be told with or without your permission. As she grew older, she felt the weight of names that were already famous before she had done anything at all. Every introduction came with a comparison. Every opportunity came with an unspoken question about whether she had earned it or inherited it. So she began, slowly, to form a different kind of ambition. Not just to succeed, but to define. Not just to be seen, but to decide how. By the time she stepped onto sets of her own, that decision was already made, even if she didn't yet know what it would cost. If anyone thought the earlier storm had been an accident, it didn't last. Years later, in another film, in another carefully constructed scene, Jamie Lee Curtis walked back into the same kind of silence. This time, the context was different, the character was different, but the intention was unmistakably her own. What unfolded on screen was not about seduction, it was about transformation. A woman stepping out of the version of herself the world had grown comfortable with and into something that could no longer be ignored. Once again, the headlines arrived faster than the analysis. Once again, the scene was pulled out of its story and pinned to a single interpretation. But something had changed. This time, it was clear that this was not a pattern of impulse, it was a pattern of authorship. Jamie was no longer reacting to the system, she was using it, turning its expectations into tools, turning its gaze into something she could aim instead of endure. Some called it defiance, some called it strategy. In truth, it was both. And beneath all of it was a quiet certainty. If she did not define her image, someone else always would. The hardest part was never the moments themselves. It was everything that came after. Hollywood has a long memory, but a short attention span. It remembers labels better than intentions. It prefers simple stories to complicated people. And for a long time, Jamie Lee Curtis had to live inside a version of herself that other people had decided to summarize. There were roles that came easily. There were roles that never came at all. There were years when the noise faded and years when it returned without warning, dragged back by some anniversary, some rerun, some recycled headline. But something else was happening, quietly, beneath the surface. She kept working. She kept choosing, not chasing the version of fame that burns fast and disappears, but building something slower, more durable, a career that did not depend on being frozen in one era or one image. The industry changed, tastes changed, the conversation changed, and somehow she was still there. Not as a symbol, not as a controversy, but as a constant. In a business that consumes most of what it celebrates, survival is not an accident, it is a skill. When people look back now, they still talk about the scenes. They talk about the frames, the still images, the moments that once felt dangerous. But those were never the story. The story was time.